December 2009, New York City had a way of making you feel isolated, even in the midst of its noise and chaos. The streets, always bustling with traffic, clanging subways, and people shouting at one another, had a strange habit of swallowing everything up, leaving you to stand alone in the middle of it all. I knew that feeling all too well. I had moved to the city a few months prior for work, settling into a small, weathered apartment in a rundown building nestled in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly known for its charm. The sounds of car alarms echoing at all hours, the occasional shout, and the hum of streetlights filtering through the dusty blinds. These were the things I had grown accustomed to. It wasn't the life I imagined when I moved here, but it was what I had to work with. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. I'd always had roommates or family or someone nearby, but not this time. This time, it was just me. The apartment wasn't much. Just a small room with creaky floors, an old radiator that clanked and hissed in the winter, and windows that rattled in the wind. I'd gotten used to the sound of the building settling and the creaks from the walls, but as the nights grew colder, I started to wonder if I was truly adjusting, or if I was just fooling myself into thinking I could handle it. The one bright spot was the couple who lived next door. Mark and Emily, young, cheerful, always smiling, the kind of people you could talk to in passing without ever becoming too involved. Their presence, while brief, had a warmth that made the entire building feel a little less empty. But as December rolled in, they left for a holiday trip. They had been planning it for months, so I wasn't surprised when they told me they'd be gone for 2 weeks. They left their lights off and their door locked, leaving the building eerily quiet. That's when I began to feel the full weight of the silence. It was a Friday, the week had been long, and I had just finished a late shift at the office. As I made my way back to my apartment, the streets seemed quieter than usual. The usual hum of the city was absent, and the air felt thicker, colder. My boots tapped lightly on the pavement, and I found myself glancing around as I walked. When I turned the corner to my building, something felt off. There, parked outside my neighbor's door, was a van. Not an ordinary delivery van or a moving truck, but an old, rusty vehicle with no visible markings. It looked out of place, too dark, too quiet for the usual New York traffic. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should take a closer look, but then I shrugged it off. It was probably nothing. After all, this was New York. People parked strange cars in strange places all the time. But as I entered the building, I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It wasn't just the van. It was something about the quietness of the night, something in the air that made everything feel off. I locked the door behind me as usual, pushed a chair against it for extra security, and tried to shake off the unease that had started to settle in. Around 3:00 a.m., I woke up suddenly. My heart was pounding, and my breath was shallow. I wasn't sure what had pulled me from sleep, but something wasn't right. The night felt suffocating, and as I strained to listen, I heard it, a sound coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just the usual city noises, sirens, distant traffic, but then I heard something else. Glass shattering, a sharp, distinct crack, followed by the faint sound of shuffling. My stomach tightened. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, holding my breath as I listened again. Another noise, this time a dull thud, as if something heavy had fallen or been thrown. Curiosity and fear compelled me to the window. I stood there for a moment, staring out at the dim streetlight below. The streets were empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just the hum of the street lamp. Then I saw him. A figure stood near the steps of my neighbor's house. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled low over his face, obscuring any details. He stood perfectly still, as though waiting for something or perhaps watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at him, my fingers gripping the edge of the curtain. He seemed unaware of my presence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I was watching. A cold sweat broke out across my brow. Something was terribly wrong. The decision to call the police. I was frozen, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Would they even do anything? I had no evidence, just a strange figure standing outside. but my fear outweighed my hesitation. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. "I think someone's trying to break into my neighbor's house. There's a guy standing outside, and he's been there for a while." The dispatcher assured me that a squad car would be sent immediately, but I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. I watched from the window, waiting for the flashing lights of the police car, but the figure didn't move. He just stood there, perfectly still, his face hidden in shadow. Minutes passed, and then, just as the police arrived, the figure disappeared into the night. They searched the area, but they found nothing. No sign of the van, no trace of the man. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police told me I was probably just tired, imagining things, but something about that night didn't sit right with me. I felt like I had narrowly avoided something far worse. The group of friends. Several weeks passed. My life returned to its usual rhythm, though the feeling of unease lingered. I often found myself looking out the window, expecting to see that figure again, but he never returned. Then, one afternoon, I was sitting in a coffee shop when I overheard a conversation between a group of friends. They were talking about an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city, an old building with a history of strange occurrences. Apparently, it had been empty for years, but people still went there, curious about the rumors of ghostly sightings and paranormal activity. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the days passed, I found myself thinking about that house. What if it had something to do with the figure I had seen outside my neighbor's house? What if there was more to the story? One night, after a few drinks, I impulsively joined the group of friends on their planned trip to the house. The encounter with the shadow. The house was as eerie as I had imagined. It stood on the edge of the city, hidden behind overgrown weeds and crumbling stone walls. The windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged, giving the place a decayed, forgotten look. Inside, it was dark, musty, and silent, save for the creaking of old wood beneath our feet. As we explored the house, I noticed something strange. A shadow, flickering in the corner of my vision. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but the longer I stayed in that place, the more the shadow seemed to move. I wasn't the only one who noticed. One of the others, Sarah, gasped and pointed. "Did you see that?" We all turned, but there was nothing there. Still, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we ventured deeper into the house, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence seemed to close in on us. The alley incident. After leaving the abandoned house, we were all on edge. It was well past midnight when we finally made our way back toward the city, but the streets were eerily empty. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. Rapid, heavy steps. I turned, but there was nothing there. I brushed it off, but then I heard it again. A faint rustling, followed by the unmistakable sound of a knife being unsheathed. My heart raced as I looked around. In the distance, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and lean, holding a glinting knife in his hand. He was walking toward us, his eyes locked onto ours with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Sarah and pulling her toward the nearest alley. But the man was quick, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. Just as he reached us, the sound of sirens filled the air, and a police car screeched around the corner. The story begins long before the Calloway family set foot in the house. In 1892, the mansion was home to the Dunham family, a reclusive yet seemingly happy family of three: Mr. Charles Dunham, his wife Elizabeth, and their young daughter Margaret. Charles, a successful banker, built the mansion as a symbol of prosperity. But beneath its grandeur lay secrets. Margaret, the apple of her parents' eyes, was an odd child. She preferred the company of her porcelain doll, Emily, to that of her peers. She often spoke to Emily as if the doll were alive, a habit dismissed as childhood whimsy. But Margaret's demeanor changed over time. She began to withdraw further, her bright laughter replaced by somber silence. Servants whispered of strange happenings. Margaret singing eerie lullabies to her doll in the dead of night, objects moving on their own, and an inexplicable chill that hung over her room. One summer evening, tragedy struck. Margaret was found lifeless at the bottom of the estate's well. The family was devastated, and the exact circumstances of her death were never uncovered. Some whispered it was an accident. Others murmured of something darker. Soon after Margaret's death, the Dunhams left the house, unable to bear the memories, and it fell into disuse. Over the decades, locals avoided the property. Stories of ghostly cries from the well and a girl in white wandering the grounds became campfire tales. But few dared to approach the mansion, and those who did claimed to feel an oppressive, otherworldly presence. Fast forward to the modern day. The Calloway family, Emily, her husband Richard, and their teenage son Sam, were eager for a fresh start. Moving from the city to the countryside seemed like the perfect opportunity to escape the hustle and bustle of their previous life. The mansion, though old, was affordable and full of charm. From the moment they arrived, the house felt off. Emily admired its vintage beauty. High ceilings, intricate woodwork, and a grand staircase that seemed plucked from a Gothic novel. But beneath the allure was an eerie stillness, as if the house had been holding its breath. The first signs of the haunting were easy to dismiss. The faint scent of roses wafted through the house, even though no flowers were present. At night, Emily heard soft whispers she attributed to creaking pipes. One evening, as she lay in bed, she was jolted awake by the sound of crying. Faint, mournful, and unmistakably human. She turned on the light, her heart racing, but saw nothing. At breakfast, Emily mentioned the incident to Richard and Sam. She was surprised to learn they had also experienced strange events. Richard had heard heavy footsteps pacing in the attic above their bedroom. Sam described seeing a fleeting shadow dart past his bedroom door late at night. The family laughed nervously, brushing it off as their imaginations adjusting to a new, unfamiliar home. Curiosity soon overcame fear. The family decided to explore the attic, which they hadn't ventured into since moving in. The narrow staircase groaned under their weight, and the air grew colder with every step. The attic was filled with forgotten relics, dusty trunks, broken furniture, and cobweb-draped chandeliers. Sam was the first to notice it. A small, intricately carved wooden box hidden beneath a pile of old linens. Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph of a little girl in a white dress holding a doll. Her wide, sorrowful eyes seemed to pierce through the faded image. Written on the back in elegant script was a single word, Margaret, followed by the year 1892. The moment they touched the photograph, the room turned icy. Emily gasped as she felt something graze her shoulder, like a hand brushing against her skin. They fled the attic, leaving the box behind. But the sense of unease followed them, deepening with every passing hour. That night, Sam's bedside lamp began to flicker. He thought it was just a faulty bulb until the room plunged into complete darkness. The air grew heavy, and a faint, musty scent filled his nostrils. He turned to the foot of his bed and froze. There she was, a girl in a white dress, her long hair tangled and matted. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips curved into a faint, sorrowful smile. She clutched a doll to her chest, its cracked porcelain face just as lifeless as hers. Sam opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. In a blink, she vanished, leaving only the faint echo of her soft cries. The family was now terrified. Emily and Richard began to argue over whether to leave the house, but Sam insisted they stay. He needed to know who Margaret was and why she haunted them. The Calloways reached out to a local historian and paranormal investigator, Henry Wallace. Henry arrived armed with equipment and a trove of knowledge about the mansion's grim history. As he listened to their experiences, his face grew grave. Margaret, Henry explained, had been an only child, isolated and deeply lonely. After her death, rumors swirled that her spirit remained tethered to the house. He believed Margaret's doll, Emily, held the key to her unrest. The doll had been her constant companion, and some claimed it was more than just a toy. Henry suggested performing a ritual to help Margaret's spirit move on. That evening, they gathered in the attic. Candles flickered as Henry recited an ancient prayer. The air grew colder, and the scent of roses filled the room. Suddenly, the photograph of Margaret flew out of the wooden box and hovered in midair before shattering on the floor. The ritual seemed to have worked. For a brief moment, the house was silent. But as they descended the attic stairs, a deafening crash echoed through the house. The shattered photograph was now at the base of the staircase, its frame intact, but the image burned black. The Calloways didn't wait for another sign. They packed their belongings and left the house that very night, leaving behind the wooden box, the photograph, and their dreams of a countryside escape. They never returned. Today, the mansion remains abandoned. Locals swear they hear a child's laughter on quiet nights or see a pale figure staring out of the attic window. The story of Margaret lives on, a reminder that some spirits cannot be laid to rest. And so, if you ever find yourself near that forgotten Victorian mansion, listen closely. You might just hear the soft, sorrowful whispers of a little girl who never left. Some places seem forgotten by time, their walls steeped in silence and shadow. But some silences aren't empty. They whisper secrets, begging to be heard. Tonight, I'll take you to one such place. A crumbling manor at the edge of an old town, where tragedy, guilt, and madness have left an indelible mark. This is the story of the Grey Widow. At the edge of the quiet village of Blackthorn stands Widow's Rest, a sprawling Victorian estate that has been abandoned for over a century. Its towering gables pierce the sky, and ivy clings to its walls like skeletal fingers. To the locals, it's a cursed place, one they avoid at all costs. But it wasn't always this way. Once, the manor was a jewel of Blackthorn, home to Eleanor and Thomas Grey, a couple who seemed destined for happiness. Yet, as they say, appearances can be deceiving. Eleanor Grey was known for her beauty and grace, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. She came from a modest background but caught the eye of Thomas Grey, a wealthy and ambitious man who was determined to make her his bride. After their lavish wedding, Thomas whisked her away to Widow's Rest, the grand estate he had inherited. For a time, it seemed they were living the perfect life, hosting extravagant dinners and strolling through the gardens hand in hand. But the dream didn't last. On a stormy night in the autumn of 1891, Thomas left the manor, claiming he had urgent business in the nearby city. Days passed, then weeks, but Thomas never returned. At first, Eleanor was frantic, sending out search parties and questioning anyone who might have seen him. But as the months dragged on, her despair turned into a suffocating stillness. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, and withdrew from the world entirely. The servants would find her wandering the halls late at night, still wearing her wedding gown, whispering his name as if summoning him back from the void. It wasn't just her grief that consumed Widow's Rest. Soon, strange accidents began to occur. A maid fell from the grand staircase, claiming she was pushed by unseen hands. A gardener was found drowned in the estate's pond, his eyes wide with terror. The surviving staff fled, leaving Eleanor alone in the vast, decaying manor. Neighbors began reporting strange sights. Candles flickering in the windows long after the house was abandoned, and a woman's silhouette drifting through the upper floors. By the time of her death, Eleanor was a shadow of her former self. On the last night of her life, a passerby heard her singing softly, a melody no one could place. At dawn, her lifeless body was discovered in the grand ballroom, wearing her wedding gown, her hands clutching a letter addressed to Thomas. The contents of the letter remain a mystery. Some say it was a confession. Others believe it was a plea for forgiveness. But whatever her final words were, they couldn't free her spirit from the torment she'd unleashed upon herself. After Eleanor's death, Widow's Rest became a place of legend. At first, it was the little things. Whispers heard on the wind, doors slamming shut without cause, and the faint sound of a piano playing from the empty ballroom. Then the sightings began. Travelers passing by the house claimed to see a woman in white staring from the windows, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Locals told of hearing soft weeping near the gates, and some swore they felt icy hands gripping their shoulders as they walked too close. In 1973, a group of teenagers from Blackthorn decided to spend the night in Widow's Rest as part of a dare. They brought flashlights, snacks, and a tape recorder, laughing as they crossed the threshold into the dilapidated mansion. But as the hours passed, their laughter turned to fear. Shadows flickered in the corners of their vision. Their tape recorder picked up faint whispers they couldn't hear in the room. At exactly midnight, one of them, a boy named Michael, vanished without a trace. The others fled in terror, claiming they had seen her. Eleanor Gray, standing at the top of the staircase, her tattered wedding gown trailing behind her, her skeletal hand reaching out. Michael was never found. In 1985, a team of paranormal investigators entered Widow's Rest. Armed with advanced equipment, they hoped to capture definitive proof of the supernatural. What they found was far beyond their expectations. Their cameras caught orbs of light hovering in the ballroom, and their audio recordings captured Eleanor's chilling voice, whispering, "Where is he?" But the most startling discovery was a hidden diary, buried beneath the floorboards of the ballroom. Its fragile pages revealed Eleanor's darkest secret. Eleanor had not been an innocent victim of abandonment. Her diary revealed that Thomas had been unfaithful, and in a fit of rage, she had poisoned him during a private dinner. Consumed by guilt, she buried his body beneath the ballroom floor, convincing herself he had simply left her. Her madness kept her trapped, even in death, replaying her crime and yearning for forgiveness that would never come. Today, Widow's Rest remains untouched, its gates rusted shut and its windows boarded up. Yet, locals swear the Grey Widow still roams its halls, searching for the man she once loved and destroyed. Some who pass by claim to hear faint cries. Others report seeing her spectral form staring out from the upper floors. Those who dare to step too close often leave with scratches, bruises, or worse, a sense that someone or something has followed them home. So, if you ever find yourself near Blackthorn and you hear a soft melody or the sound of footsteps behind you, tread carefully. Eleanor Gray is still waiting, and she doesn't like to be alone. The screen fades from black to reveal a deserted road under a pale, moonlit sky. A faint mist creeps along the edges, and the wind howls softly. The camera pans slowly, showing the road stretching endlessly into the darkness. Some roads lead you home, others take you somewhere else. This is the story of Blackwood Road, a road where travelers vanish, leaving behind only whispers of their last, desperate moments. And tonight, I'm going to tell you about one such journey. The screen cuts to a lone car driving down the road. Its headlights pierce the darkness, but the surrounding trees swallow the light. Inside, a man mid-30s is behind the wheel. His face is tired, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Jason Miller was an ordinary man with an ordinary plan. He was driving home late one night after a long business trip. The GPS had suggested a shortcut, Blackwood Road. It seemed harmless enough, a quiet detour through the countryside. But as Jason would soon learn, some shortcuts are best left unexplored. The sound of the car engine hums softly. Jason checks the clock on the dashboard. It reads 12:17 a.m. He sighs, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. The road is eerily empty. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No other cars, no animals, not even the chirp of crickets. Just the hum of his engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. Jason glances in his rearview mirror. For a split second, he sees something or someone standing in the middle of the road behind him. A figure in a tattered white dress, their face obscured by shadows. He saw her, just for a moment, a figure standing in the middle of the road, far behind him, pale, motionless, watching. Jason slams the brakes, his heart pounding. He looks again, but the road is empty. He told himself it was his imagination. The mind plays tricks in the dead of night, doesn't it? And so he kept driving. The camera shows Jason shaking his head, turning the radio on for distraction. The static-filled sound of an old song fills the air, but the eerie silence of the road lingers. The car radio suddenly crackles. The music cuts out, replaced by faint, childlike laughter. Jason frowns, adjusting the dial. The laughter was soft at first, like a memory echoing from a distant corner of his mind. He told himself it was interference, static. But as the sound grew louder, clearer, it became impossible to ignore. Jason's breathing quickens as the laughter distorts into high-pitched giggles. He turns off the radio, but the sound doesn't stop. That's when he realized the laughter wasn't coming from the radio anymore. Jason glances at the passenger seat, and for a split second, he sees the reflection of a child in the window, a face pale and hollow, with empty eyes staring back at him. Jason presses down on the accelerator, desperate to escape. The trees lining the road seem to close in, their branches reaching toward the car. Suddenly, he spots someone ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. She was back, the same figure he'd seen before. This time, there was no mistaking her. She wore a white dress, dirt-stained and torn, her long hair matted over her face. Jason slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching against the asphalt. Jason's car skids to a stop just inches from the figure. But when he steps out to confront her, she's gone. The road is empty again. Panic began to creep in. He turned in circles, searching the darkness. Where had she gone? He shouted into the void, but his voice was swallowed by the night. Jason climbs back into the car, locking the doors. The headlights flicker, and for a moment, the woman's face appears in the beam of light, staring at him from the side of the road. Jason speeds down the road, the trees blurring into shadows. But the faster he drives, the more the whispers begin. Soft voices fill the car, their words indistinct but unnerving. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, a low murmur, growing louder, surrounding him. He turned the radio back on, but it didn't help. He screamed at the empty road ahead, gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. The camera shows Jason's wide, terrified eyes as he sees something ahead, a dilapidated sign that reads, "Welcome to Blackwood." And that's when he realized he'd been driving in circles. The road wasn't taking him home, it was taking him back. Jason's car sputters to a stop as the engine dies. He slams the dashboard, cursing, but the silence swallows his frustration. The headlights dim, leaving him in total darkness. Stranded, alone, and terrified, Jason did the only thing he could. He got out of the car. The road stretched into oblivion, and the trees loomed like silent witnesses. He turned on his phone's flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the fog. As Jason walks, the camera follows him from behind. The sound of footsteps echoes, but when he stops, the footsteps continue. He whirls around, but there's no one there. And then, she came back. This time, she was closer. Her face, pale and hollow, was inches from his. Her breath was cold against his skin. And she whispered. The woman's voice, soft and chilling, whispers, "You shouldn't have come." Jason stumbles back, falling onto the road. The camera pans to show the figure standing over him, her empty eyes glowing in the dark. The screen cuts to black. The sound of Jason's screams echoes into silence. When the camera fades back in, the road is empty. Jason's car is gone. All that remains is his phone, its screen cracked, lying in the middle of the road. They never found him. Jason Miller became just another name in the long list of disappearances on Blackwood Road. Some say it was an accident. Others claim the road itself is cursed, a place where the lost become a part of the darkness. The camera pans out, showing the endless stretch of Blackwood Road disappearing into the mist. So, if you ever find yourself driving down a quiet, empty road late at night, check your mirrors. Because sometimes, the road isn't as empty as it seems. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of faint, childlike laughter echoing in the distance.